Few relationship patterns create more confusion than the silent dance between a deeply caring person and someone who seems to pull away the moment emotions become real. At first, everything feels effortless. The connection is strong. Conversations flow naturally. Then, without warning, the distance begins. Messages become shorter. Affection fades. Plans disappear. One person tries harder to save the connection, while the other seems to need more and more space. Most people assume this happens because the caring person did not love enough. Psychology points toward a different possibility. In many cases, the more someone chases, explains, and sacrifices themselves to keep the relationship alive, the more pressure the other person feels, especially if they have strong avoidant tendencies. Yet there is another pattern that receives far less attention. There is a certain kind of empath, not one who becomes cold, cruel, or manipulative, but one who quietly develops emotional strength and healthy boundaries. Strangely, this shift often changes the entire relationship dynamic. It creates reactions that surprise both people involved. The person who once seemed completely unaffected may suddenly become curious, unsettled, or even afraid of losing the connection they appeared to take for granted. The surprising part is that this change has very little to do with mind games. It has everything to do with how human attachment, emotional availability, and perceived loss influence behavior. These are patterns that researchers have explored for years, yet they are often misunderstood in everyday conversations. Throughout this video, we are going to separate popular myths from psychological principles. You will discover why some empaths unintentionally push avoidant partners even farther away, why endless patience does not always create emotional closeness, why healthy boundaries can completely change the emotional balance between two people, and why the strongest form of empathy is often the one that includes self-respect. We will also uncover lesser-known psychological concepts that explain why emotional distance sometimes creates awareness, why people often recognize value only after it becomes less available, and why true confidence affects relationships in ways that constant reassurance never can. Most importantly, you will learn why this is not about making someone chase you or winning a psychological battle. It is about understanding human behavior so you can stop repeating painful patterns and start protecting your own peace. Stay with us until the very end, because the final lesson brings everything together and reveals the biggest mistake both empaths and avoidants make without even realizing it. Once you understand that final piece, you may never look at relationships the same way again. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful videos that combine psychology, human behavior, and practical life lessons in a simple and engaging way, make sure to subscribe and join our growing community, because every video is designed to help you understand people a little better, while understanding yourself even more. The biggest mistake people make when trying to understand avoidance is believing they are afraid of love. On the surface, that explanation seems reasonable. They pull away when relationships become serious. They need space after moments of closeness. They sometimes appear emotionally unavailable even when they clearly care. But if you look deeper into attachment psychology, a different picture begins to appear. Most avoidants are not running from another person. They are running from the uncomfortable feeling of emotional dependence. To them, depending too much on someone else can feel risky. It can feel like losing control over their own emotions. This pattern often begins much earlier in life, long before adult relationships. Some people grow up learning that showing too much emotion leads to disappointment, rejection, criticism, or neglect. Over time, the mind adapts by creating a protective strategy. Instead of moving toward emotional closeness, it moves away from it. Instead of asking for comfort, it learns to rely almost entirely on itself. As adults, these people may still want connection, but another part of them quietly believes that getting too close could eventually lead to pain. That inner conflict explains why avoidance can sometimes look confusing. One day they seem warm, caring, and fully present. They laugh, open up, make plans for the future, and show genuine affection. Then suddenly they become distant. Messages slow down. Conversations become shorter. They seem distracted or emotionally unavailable. To the other person, it feels as if everything changed overnight. In reality, the feelings may not have disappeared at all. What often changes is the level of emotional intensity they are experiencing. As the relationship becomes more meaningful, their internal alarm system may become more active. The closer they feel, the stronger their urge to create distance. It is not always a conscious decision. Sometimes they do not even understand why they suddenly need space. They simply know that too much closeness feels overwhelming. This is why an avoidant can genuinely enjoy someone's company while still creating emotional distance. These two experiences can exist at the same time. They may care deeply, yet still withdraw because vulnerability feels unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Understanding this difference changes everything because it shifts the focus away from the false idea that avoidants never care. Many of them care very deeply. The problem is not caring. The problem is feeling emotionally exposed. Vulnerability asks a person to lower their defenses, trust another human being, and accept the possibility of disappointment. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, that can feel much more frightening than loneliness itself. This is where many empaths unknowingly step into a painful cycle. Empaths often notice emotional distance long before anyone says a word. They sense changes in tone, energy, facial expressions, and communication. Because they naturally care about other people, their first instinct is usually to fix the problem. They send another message. They ask if everything is okay. They explain their feelings in greater detail. They become even more patient. They give more time, more understanding, more reassurance, and more emotional energy. From their perspective, they are trying to save the relationship. Their heart tells them that love grows stronger through effort, compassion, and consistency. Those qualities are beautiful in healthy relationships. But inside an unhealthy attachment pattern, those same qualities can accidentally keep the cycle alive. Every time the empath increases emotional pressure, even in a kind and loving way, the avoidant may feel an even stronger need to step back. The empath notices the distance and moves closer. The avoidant feels overwhelmed and creates more space. The empath worries and tries even harder. The avoidant withdraws even further. Before long, both people are exhausted, yet neither fully understands what is happening. One feels abandoned. The other feels emotionally crowded. Neither person necessarily wants the relationship to fail, but both continue repeating the same pattern because they believe their own behavior is solving the problem. The empath thinks more love will heal the distance. The avoidant thinks more distance will calm the pressure. Ironically, both strategies often produce the opposite result. Overgiving is one of the first traps. An empath may start giving more attention than they receive, hoping kindness will create security. They become available at every moment. They cancel their own plans. They constantly check in. They place the other person's emotional comfort above their own. At first, this may appear generous, but over time it quietly changes the balance of the relationship. The empath begins carrying almost all the emotional responsibility, while the avoidant becomes used to always receiving that effort. Then comes over-explaining. Every silence feels like it needs an answer. Every misunderstanding requires another conversation. Every emotional reaction turns into a long message trying to make everything perfectly clear. The intention is honesty, but the result can become emotional overload for someone already uncomfortable with deep emotional discussions. Then comes fixing. The empath believes every problem has a solution if enough patience and love are applied. Instead of allowing the other person to face their own emotional struggles, they try to rescue them from every uncomfortable feeling. Waiting follows soon after. Weeks become months. Months become years. The empath convinces themselves that one more chance, one more conversation, or one more sacrifice will finally create the relationship they have been hoping for. Endless patience slowly turns into emotional self-sacrifice. They stop asking what they need. They stop protecting their own peace. Their happiness becomes completely dependent on whether the avoidant moves closer or farther away. Without realizing it, they have placed their emotional well-being into someone else's hands. This is exactly where the real turning point begins, and it has nothing to do with becoming cold or emotionally unavailable. The most powerful empath is not the one who suddenly stops caring. It is not the one who decides to play games or make the other person jealous. Real change begins when the empath starts respecting themselves as much as they respect everyone else. This kind of empath still has compassion. They still listen. They still care deeply. But they no longer believe that love requires abandoning themselves. They understand that healthy relationships are built by two emotionally responsible people, not one person carrying the entire emotional weight. Instead of chasing, they pause. Instead of begging for attention, they allow space. Instead of trying to rescue every difficult moment, they trust the other person to take responsibility for their own emotions. They stop measuring their worth by someone else's response. They remain calm even when uncertainty appears. Calmness is powerful because it breaks the emotional cycle. Panic usually creates more panic. Desperation often creates more distance. Calmness creates room for clarity. Emotional security becomes their greatest strength. They know who they are whether someone stays or leaves. Their identity no longer depends on constant reassurance. They no longer chase because they understand that genuine connection cannot be forced. They no longer beg because love given under pressure rarely creates lasting closeness. They do not punish through silence or manipulation because those behaviors only replace one unhealthy pattern with another. They also stop trying to rescue people who are unwilling to face their own emotional work. Caring for someone is different from carrying someone. The difference may seem small, but it completely changes the relationship. This shift also changes the psychology behind the interaction. One reason is emotional scarcity. Human beings naturally notice what is no longer endlessly available. This does not mean becoming unavailable on purpose or pretending not to care. It simply means your attention is no longer unlimited. Your time, energy, and emotional investment become balanced instead of constantly flowing in one direction. When someone always has immediate access to your emotional support regardless of how they behave, they may stop recognizing its value. Healthy boundaries restore balance by showing that your care is meaningful because it comes with self-respect. Another important principle is autonomy. Every person needs some level of freedom inside a relationship. Avoidants often react strongly when they feel that freedom is disappearing. Healthy distance removes unnecessary pressure. It allows conversations to happen naturally instead of through constant emotional urgency. This often creates a calmer environment where genuine connection becomes more possible. Then there is loss aversion, a well-known psychological tendency where people often react more strongly to losing something valuable than to having it consistently available. When the empath stops chasing and begins investing equally in their own life, the avoidant may finally notice the emotional presence that had quietly become part of their daily world. It is not because the empath became mysterious. It is because consistent access has changed. Finally comes attachment activation. Sometimes emotional distance brings hidden feelings to the surface. When constant reassurance disappears, a person who seemed emotionally detached may suddenly begin thinking more about the relationship, reflecting on what they truly value, and recognizing emotions they had been pushing aside. None of this guarantees that every avoidant will change, because every individual is different. But it helps explain why genuine self-respect often creates healthier relationship dynamics than endless emotional pursuit ever could. One of the biggest changes in any relationship does not begin with a dramatic conversation. It begins with a quiet decision inside one person. That decision is to stop chasing. Many people hear those words and immediately think it means becoming distant or pretending not to care. That is not what it means at all. Stopping the chase simply means refusing to force closeness that another person is not ready to give. The empath no longer spends every day wondering what message to send next, what words might change the other person's mind, or what sacrifice might finally create consistency. They stop trying to earn love through endless effort. This shift is surprisingly powerful because it removes the emotional pressure that has quietly been controlling the relationship. When someone constantly chases, the relationship often becomes unbalanced. One person is always reaching forward while the other slowly becomes used to standing still. Over time, this pattern teaches both people unhealthy lessons. The empath learns that love requires constant work, while the avoidant learns that distance will always be followed by another chance. When the chase finally ends, that familiar pattern disappears. Suddenly there is space where constant pursuit once existed. For an avoidant, this can create an unexpected emotional reaction. At first, they may simply notice the silence. Then they may notice the missing attention. Then they may begin asking themselves questions they never had to ask before. Why has the dynamic changed? Why is this person no longer trying to pull me closer? Those questions often create reflection instead of resistance. Reflection is important because people rarely grow while defending themselves. They grow when they become curious about their own behavior. The second behavior is learning to allow silence. Silence makes many people uncomfortable because they immediately assume that something must be wrong. An empath often feels responsible for filling every quiet moment with reassurance, explanations, or emotional conversations. Yet silence is not always rejection. Sometimes silence is simply space. Healthy relationships need room for thoughts to settle without constant pressure to fix every feeling immediately. Avoidants, in particular, often process emotions internally before they are ready to speak about them. When every moment of silence is interrupted with more questions, more explanations, or more emotional urgency, they may feel overwhelmed rather than understood. Allowing silence does not mean accepting disrespect or disappearing without communication. It means resisting the urge to control every uncomfortable moment. It means trusting that not every pause requires immediate action. This creates emotional breathing room for both people. The empath also benefits because they stop living in constant anxiety. Instead of spending every quiet hour imagining the worst possible outcome, they redirect their attention toward their own emotional balance. Silence becomes less frightening because their peace no longer depends on immediate reassurance. Ironically, when conversations finally happen after healthy space has been respected, they are often calmer, clearer, and more honest than conversations driven by panic. Silence loses its power to create fear because it is no longer treated like an emergency. The third behavior may seem simple, yet it changes everything. The empath maintains their own life. Many caring people slowly shrink their world without realizing it. Their hobbies become less important. Friendships receive less attention. Personal goals are postponed. Every free moment becomes emotionally connected to one relationship. Their happiness begins rising and falling according to someone else's availability. This creates enormous pressure because no relationship can safely carry the weight of another person's entire emotional world. A self-respecting empath refuses to let that happen. They continue growing. They continue learning. They spend time with family and friends. They protect their health. They pursue meaningful work. They laugh without guilt. They make plans whether someone else joins them or not. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional stability. An avoidant often notices this shift because the relationship is no longer built around constant emotional dependence. Instead of feeling responsible for another person's entire happiness, they begin interacting with someone who already has a full and meaningful life. That changes the emotional atmosphere completely. Confidence becomes visible without being announced. Independence becomes attractive because it is healthy rather than defensive. The empath is no longer waiting beside the phone, hoping every notification will change their day. They are living their own life while remaining open to genuine connection. This balanced approach reduces pressure while increasing mutual respect. People naturally value relationships more when both individuals bring complete lives into the partnership instead of expecting one person to fill every emotional need. The fourth behavior is setting clear boundaries. Many people misunderstand boundaries because they think they are walls designed to keep others away. Healthy boundaries do the opposite. They create a safe structure where trust can actually grow. A boundary simply says, "This is how I expect to be treated, and this is what I will do if that expectation is repeatedly ignored." Notice that a boundary is about your own behavior, not controlling someone else's choices. For example, an empath may decide that disappearing for weeks without communication is not acceptable in a serious relationship. They are not forcing another person to communicate. They are simply deciding what they will accept in their own life. This difference is extremely important. Avoidants often fear being controlled. Clear boundaries remove confusion because expectations become honest instead of hidden. There are no emotional games, no secret tests, no passive-aggressive behavior. Everything becomes direct, respectful, and calm. Healthy boundaries also protect the empath from endless emotional exhaustion. Instead of repeatedly tolerating behavior that causes pain while hoping it will eventually change, they become honest about what they need. Honesty may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but it prevents years of quiet resentment. Relationships become healthier when both people know where they stand instead of constantly guessing. The fifth behavior is accepting any outcome. This may be the hardest lesson of all because it asks the empath to release control over something deeply important. Many people believe acceptance means giving up. In reality, acceptance means recognizing that love cannot be forced. You can communicate honestly, you can care deeply, you can become a better partner, but you cannot make another person choose emotional growth. That choice belongs entirely to them. Accepting any outcome removes desperation from the relationship. The empath no longer acts from fear of abandonment. They act from self-respect. If the relationship grows, they welcome it. If it ends, they trust that they will survive. This mindset creates remarkable emotional freedom because every decision is no longer driven by panic. Ironically, this calm confidence often changes the emotional energy between two people. The avoidant no longer senses someone trying to hold them in place. Instead, they see someone who values connection without sacrificing themselves. Healthy love always includes freedom. Not freedom to disrespect another person, but freedom to choose the relationship every day without emotional pressure. That choice has far greater meaning than staying simply because someone refuses to let go. These changes often create emotions inside avoidants that are rarely discussed openly. From the outside, they may appear calm, logical, and completely unaffected. Friends might even assume they moved on quickly. Yet outward behavior does not always reflect inner experience. Many avoidants become deeply confused when a familiar relationship pattern suddenly changes. They expected another message, another attempt to fix things, another conversation that would allow them to delay dealing with their own emotions. Instead, they encounter calm consistency. That difference can be unsettling because it removes the emotional script they had quietly grown used to. Confusion often appears first. They may struggle to understand why the other person's behavior feels so different. Curiosity often follows. They begin paying closer attention. They wonder what changed. They notice the absence of pressure. They notice the confidence that replaced anxiety. This curiosity is important because curiosity opens the door to self-reflection. People rarely question their own habits until those habits stop producing familiar results. Another feeling that sometimes appears is the fear of permanent loss. This does not happen in every situation, but when it does, it can be surprisingly powerful. Human beings often adapt to consistent emotional support without fully recognizing its value. When that support becomes balanced instead of unlimited, the possibility of losing it permanently becomes more real. This does not mean the avoidant suddenly becomes a completely different person overnight. It simply means the relationship now occupies a different place in their mind. They may begin remembering meaningful conversations, shared experiences, acts of kindness, and emotional moments they previously pushed aside while focusing on maintaining distance. Regret may slowly appear alongside these memories. They wonder whether they misunderstood someone who genuinely cared for them. They question choices they once defended with certainty. At the same time, another part of them may still crave independence and emotional safety. This creates an internal conflict that can feel exhausting. One part wants closeness. Another part wants protection. One part misses the connection. Another part fears becoming vulnerable again. Understanding this conflict helps us avoid unfair stereotypes. Not every avoidant is careless, selfish, or emotionally cold. Many are carrying protective patterns that developed long before the current relationship began. At the same time, understanding their struggle does not require accepting unhealthy behavior forever. Compassion and accountability can exist together. You can understand why someone behaves a certain way without allowing that behavior to repeatedly harm your own emotional well-being. This leads to one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding these relationship dynamics. Many people hear about healthy boundaries and immediately assume the goal is to make someone chase you. They begin looking for techniques, strategies, or psychological tricks that will create emotional dependence. That completely misses the point. Emotional maturity is never about controlling another person's feelings. It is about taking responsibility for your own. If your goal is to make someone anxious, jealous, or afraid, you are no longer building a healthy relationship. You are simply replacing one unhealthy pattern with another. Manipulation creates temporary reactions, but it does not create lasting trust. Someone may return because they fear losing you, but fear is not the same as emotional security. Games may create excitement for a short time, yet they almost always damage honesty in the long run. Healthy boundaries work because they are truthful. You are not pretending to be unavailable. You genuinely have a full life. You are not ignoring someone to punish them. You simply refuse to chase unhealthy dynamics. You are not withholding affection to gain power. You are offering affection freely while also protecting your own peace. That difference changes everything. Real confidence does not need to prove itself through emotional tricks. It quietly appears in consistent actions, honest communication, and self-respect. Once this healthier pattern is established, two very different paths may begin to unfold. The first possibility is that the avoidant starts doing their own emotional work. This does not happen because someone forced them. It happens because they become willing to examine the beliefs and habits that have shaped their relationships for years. They begin recognizing how distancing themselves affects people they genuinely care about. They become more open during conversations. Instead of avoiding difficult emotions, they slowly learn to stay present with them. Communication becomes more honest because neither person feels trapped inside old patterns. The empath expresses needs without fear. The avoidant expresses fears without immediately escaping them. Trust grows gradually instead of through dramatic promises. Progress may still be slow because attachment patterns rarely disappear overnight, but both people are finally moving in the same direction. The relationship becomes healthier because responsibility is now shared instead of carried by only one person. The second possibility is that nothing changes. The avoidant continues avoiding emotional responsibility. They continue repeating familiar habits. They remain unwilling to communicate honestly or work through their fears. Years earlier, this outcome might have devastated the empath because they believed every ending meant personal failure. Now the experience feels different. There is still sadness because losing someone important is never easy. But there is also peace because they know they gave the relationship an honest chance without abandoning themselves. They no longer confuse endless sacrifice with unconditional love. Instead of waiting forever for potential, they accept reality. Instead of chasing someone who refuses to meet them halfway, they continue building a meaningful life filled with healthy connections, personal growth, and emotional stability. Even though this outcome may not be the one they originally wanted, it is still healthier than spending years trapped inside an exhausting cycle where one person constantly pursues while the other constantly withdraws. Believing that more effort alone will eventually solve a problem that requires willingness from both people. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The strongest empath is not the one who gives the most, waits the longest, or sacrifices everything for the hope that someone else will finally change. True strength looks much quieter than that. It is the ability to care deeply without losing yourself in the process. It is choosing compassion without accepting endless emotional pain. It is loving another person while remembering that your own heart deserves the same kindness you so freely give to everyone else. That is the kind of empathy that creates peace instead of exhaustion. That is the kind of empathy that transforms not only relationships, but the person living them. Many people spend years believing that if they could just say the right words, become more patient, or love a little harder, everything would eventually fall into place. But healthy relationships are never built by one person carrying all the emotional weight. They are built by two people who are both willing to grow, communicate, and take responsibility for themselves. The moment your self-worth stops depending on someone else's emotional availability, everything begins to change. You stop chasing answers that never come. You stop measuring your value by delayed replies, mixed signals, or inconsistent affection. You stop living in fear that someone else's choices define your worth. Instead, you begin living from a place of quiet confidence. Ironically, this is often the moment when relationships reveal their true nature. Some people will step closer because they finally recognize the value of what they almost lost. Others will continue walking away because they are not ready to face their own emotional patterns. And for the first time, you realize that both outcomes are okay. The greatest power has never been the ability to make someone stay. It has never been convincing another person to love you, understand you, or choose you. Real power is reaching a place where your happiness, your peace, and your identity no longer depend on another person's decision. That kind of freedom cannot be taken away. It cannot be controlled by mixed signals or emotional distance. It comes from knowing that your value existed long before anyone entered your life, and it will remain long after anyone leaves. The people who truly belong in your life will never require you to abandon yourself just to keep them close. They will appreciate your kindness, respect your boundaries, and meet your effort with effort of their own. So before you leave, take a quiet moment and ask yourself one simple question. Are you fighting for a healthy relationship? Or are you fighting to avoid losing someone at the cost of losing yourself? The answer to that question could change the direction of your entire life. If this video gave you a new perspective, helped you understand your relationships a little better, or reminded you of your own worth, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future videos. Also, take a second to like this video and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. You never know whose life could change because of one conversation or one new understanding. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember this. The moment you stop abandoning yourself is often the moment your life truly begins.